Dad said he'd only invest in one son's future. Today, I offered my golden brother a job as bartender. The smell of onions sizzling in butter always takes me back to her. Even now at 32, when I close my eyes and inhale that sweet, pungent aroma, I can feel my mother standing beside me, her gentle hand guiding mine as we cook together. Those memories are all I have left of the only person who ever truly loved me for who I am. My name is Caleb Mitchell, and I've spent my entire life knowing I was a disappointment. Not to the world, I've done well enough there, but to the man who should have loved me unconditionally. My father, Gregory, made it clear from my earliest memories that I wasn't the son he wanted. "Stand up straight, Caleb. Jordan, show your brother how to throw properly," he'd bark from the sidelines of whatever sports field he'd dragged me to that weekend. My younger brother Jordan would demonstrate with perfect form, earning Dad's approving nod, while I'd fumble and drop the ball again, followed by that familiar disappointed sigh. At home, the pattern continued. Jordan's room was a shrine to his athletic achievements. Trophies, medals, and photographs of Dad with his arm proudly wrapped around his real son. My room held books and cooking magazines I hid in my desk drawer. The one time Dad discovered my subscription to culinary arts, he threw it in the trash. "No son of mine is going to waste time on such feminine nonsense," he said, his voice dripping with disgust. Mom understood, though. "Your great-grandfather was a chef in France," she whispered one night as we secretly baked cookies. "I wanted to be a chef too before I married your father and took over the family business accounts." Her eyes sparkled when she added, "Some men just don't understand passion, Caleb. Don't let him dim your light." But my light nearly went out when I was 13 and Mom died. Cancer took her quickly, leaving behind a house of men who didn't know how to grieve. Dad buried himself in work. Jordan threw himself into sports. I found solace in the kitchen, recreating Mom's recipes from memory, feeling her presence in every stir of the spoon. The confrontation I'll never forget came 3 weeks after her funeral. Dad found me making Mom's beef bourguignon, tears streaming down my face as the familiar aromas filled our kitchen. "What the hell are you doing?" he demanded, face flushed with anger. For once, I didn't shrink away. "Cooking, like Mom taught me." "Men don't belong in kitchens," he spat. "This stops now." Something broke inside me. Mom wanted to be a chef. Was she weak? His face darkened. "Don't bring her into this." "You never loved me, did you?" The words escaped before I could stop them. Dad didn't hesitate. "You're not the son I wanted." 5 words that confirmed what I'd always known but hoped wasn't true. Those words haunted me for years, but they also freed me. If I wasn't the son he wanted, I'd stop trying to be. I turned 17 and started working secretly at Luciano's, a small Italian restaurant downtown. I'd wash dishes until closing. Then Chef Marco would teach me knife skills and sauce techniques after hours. When Dad thought I was at study group, I was actually learning how to make perfect risotto. "You have the touch," Marco would say, watching me taste and adjust seasonings without measuring. "It's a gift, Caleb. Don't waste it." By senior year, I knew cooking wasn't just an escape. It was my calling. When the acceptance letter arrived from Le Cordon Bleu in Paris, I felt Mom's presence so strongly I could almost hear her congratulating me. But the school's tuition was far beyond what I could earn washing dishes. Only one person could help me. I approached Dad in his study on a Sunday evening. Jordan was out celebrating another championship win with his college team. Dad looked up from his newspaper, annoyed at the interruption. "I've been accepted to culinary school in France," I said, placing the letter on his desk. "I need help with tuition." He barely glanced at it. "No." "Dad, this is all I've ever wanted. It's a prestigious school." I said no. He turned a page, dismissing me. "Why not?" I demanded. "You paid for Jordan's entire college education without question. You buy him new equipment whenever he asks. Why won't you help me?" Dad finally looked at me, his eyes cold. "Because Jordan deserves it. He's going somewhere in life. This cooking nonsense is just a phase." "It's not a phase, it's my future." He leaned forward then, his voice dropping to a dangerous level. "Listen carefully, Caleb. I'm only investing in one son's future, and that's Jordan's. If you succeeded at this chef business, it would only make him feel inadequate. I won't let that happen." The room seemed to tilt beneath my feet. "You're deliberately holding me back? To protect Jordan's ego?" Jordan is destined for greater things. Your little hobby would just create unnecessary competition. Something shattered inside me, the last fragile hope that he might ever see me as worthy. What kind of father actively sabotages his own child? His expression didn't change. The kind who knows which son deserves his support. That night, I packed everything I could fit into 2 suitcases. My Aunt Eleanor, Mom's sister, had always told me her door was open. I called her from the bus station. 3 weeks later, thanks to Aunt Eleanor's savings and a loan from Chef Marco, I boarded a plane to Paris with nothing but determination, and my mother's favorite chef's knife wrapped carefully in my luggage. As the plane lifted off American soil, I made a promise to myself. I would succeed without him. One day, Gregory Mitchell would regret throwing away his son. Paris embraced me like my father never had. The City of Light became my new home, and Le Cordon Bleu my sanctuary. I worked harder than I ever had before, studying by day, working in restaurant kitchens by night. Every blister, every burn, every exhausted night was a step toward proving him wrong. 2 years later, I graduated at the top of my class and secured a position at La Maison Dorée, a 2-star Michelin restaurant. As I tied my apron on my first day, Chef Jean-Pierre nodded approvingly. "You have hunger in your eyes, Americain," he said. "Not just for food, but for something more." He was right. I was hungry to prove my worth, not to my father anymore, but to myself. Each perfect dish was a rebellion against every dismissive word, every disappointed look. I began saving money. One day, I would return to America and open my own restaurant. One day, the name Caleb Mitchell would mean something in the culinary world. And no one, especially not Gregory Mitchell, would be able to take that away from me. 5 years passed in Paris like a beautiful dream. I climbed from line cook to sous chef, earned respect in kitchens where Americans were rarely taken seriously, and saved every euro I could. When the time came to return to America, I wasn't the same uncertain young man who had fled his father's house. I chose Seattle for my restaurant, far from my hometown, but still in America. My French colleagues Antoine and Mathieu joined me as partners, bringing their expertise in pastry and wine. Together, we transformed a neglected brick building in Pike Place into something magical. "What will you call it?" Antoine asked as we stood surveying the empty space. "Margaret's," I said, without hesitation. My mother's name felt right on my lips. This is for her. The months that followed were a whirlwind of construction, permits, menu planning, and staff hiring. When food critics from the Seattle Times and Eater came to our soft opening, I thought I might collapse from anxiety, but their reviews were glowing. "A star is born in Seattle," wrote one. "Caleb Mitchell cooks with the precision of a technician and the soul of a poet," wrote another. Reservations filled up months in advance. Food bloggers posted pictures of our dishes. A feature in Bon Appetit magazine called Margaret's the Pacific Northwest's most exciting new restaurant. For the first time in my life, I felt like I had created something truly meaningful. The grand opening party was set for a Saturday evening in early autumn. I invited Aunt Eleanor, Chef Marco, my culinary school friends, and the small circle of people who had believed in me when my own family hadn't. The restaurant was decorated with fresh flowers and candlelight, and my team had prepared a special tasting menu showcasing our signature dishes. I was in the kitchen checking the final preparations when my host approached with an uncomfortable expression. "Chef, there are 2 men at the door saying they're your family. They're not on the guest list, but they insist on coming in." My stomach dropped. I knew exactly who it was. When I walked into the entrance, there they stood, Gregory and Jordan Mitchell, both wearing suits that looked freshly purchased, smiles plastered on their faces like they belonged here. My father had aged considerably, his hair now completely gray, new lines etched deeply around his eyes. Jordan looked softer around the middle, his once athletic frame now carrying extra weight. "Son!" My father's booming voice filled the entryway as he stepped forward with outstretched arms. "What an achievement! I always knew you had it in you." I remained still, not returning his embrace, watching as his arms awkwardly dropped back to his sides. Jordan stepped forward next, that familiar cocky grin in place. "Hey, big brother, this place is incredible. I always told Dad you'd make it someday. The audacity was breathtaking. 10 years of silence and now they acted like proud, supportive family members? I said nothing, just observed them with detached curiosity. What game were they playing? My father cleared his throat and produced a wrapped package. We brought something special for your big night. I unwrapped it slowly. Inside was a portrait of my mother, clearly commissioned recently, painted from an old photograph. She was smiling in her garden, the sunlight catching her auburn hair. For the restaurant, my father said, looking pleased with himself. Margaret should have a picture of Margaret, don't you think? She would be so proud of what you've accomplished. It was manipulative and calculated, using my mother's memory as a tool to soften me. But I had to admit the portrait was beautiful. She looked just as I remembered her. Thank you, I said neutrally. Would you like to see the restaurant? I led them on a brief tour, listening to their exaggerated compliments and watching as they helped themselves to champagne. Finally, in a quiet corner, my father revealed his true purpose. Caleb, we need to talk about Jordan. His voice dropped conspiratorially. He's been having a difficult time. Jordan looked down at his shoes. My father continued. After college, things didn't quite work out with the sports career. He's been between opportunities. I translated silently. Jordan had failed, and my father couldn't handle it. He's been tending bar at the country club, my father said distastefully. But that's obviously beneath a Mitchell. And, I prompted, we thought, with your new restaurant being such a success, you might bring Jordan on as a partner. He has excellent people skills, and he could handle the business side while you focus on the cooking. I almost laughed aloud. Jordan, who had never worked hard for anything in his life, wanted to waltz in and become equal partners in the business I'd spent years building? I see, I said carefully. That's certainly something to consider. My father's face brightened. I knew you'd understand. Family is everything, after all. I smiled then, a smile that didn't reach my eyes. Let me think about it. We should talk more after the party. They looked satisfied, believing they had won me over. Little did they know I had something else entirely in mind. Throughout the evening, I played the gracious host, introducing my father and brother to Seattle's culinary elite as if we were a perfectly normal, loving family. Gregory beamed with false pride, clapping me on the shoulder whenever possible. Always knew my boy had a special talent, he told the food critic from the Seattle Times. Cooking was in his blood from day one. I encouraged him to follow his passion. Jordan played his part too, regaling guests with fictional childhood stories. When we were kids, Caleb would always cook these amazing breakfasts on weekends. Dad and I were his biggest fans. I let them weave their tapestry of lies, watching as they helped themselves to expensive champagne and hobnobbed with my guests. Every handshake, every laugh, every fabricated story was another thread in the web I would use to ensnare them. At 9 o'clock, Antoine tapped a glass for silence. The moment had arrived. I stepped to the center of the room, where a small stage had been set up. The restaurant fell quiet as I took the microphone, all eyes on me. My father and brother stood near the front, glasses raised expectantly. Thank you all for coming tonight, I began. Opening Margaret's has been the fulfillment of a lifelong dream. This restaurant is named after my mother, who first taught me to love food and cooking. Appreciative murmurs rippled through the crowd. I continued. I'd like to thank those who made this possible. My partners, Antoine and Mathieu, who believed in my vision. Chef Marco, who gave a teenage boy his first chance in a professional kitchen. I paused, my eyes finding my aunt in the crowd. My Aunt Eleanor, who took me in when I had nowhere else to go, who along with her friends helped collect enough money to send me to culinary school when my own father refused. The room grew uncomfortably quiet. I could see my father's smile faltering. Yes, I had a father who could have easily afforded my tuition, but he refused. Not because he couldn't pay, but because he was afraid I might outshine my brother Jordan. A father who told me to my face that he was only investing in one son's future. Gasps echoed through the room. All eyes turned to Gregory, whose face had drained of color. I was thrown out of my home at 17 for wanting to be a chef. Told I wasn't the son he wanted. For years, I received not a single phone call, not a birthday card, not a dime of support. Jordan stared at the floor, unable to meet the judgmental gazes now directed his way. And yet, I continued, my voice softer now, here they are tonight, my father and brother, Suddenly proud of my success, suddenly part of my story. Isn't that interesting? The silence was deafening. Gregory's hand trembled slightly around his champagne glass. But today is a celebration, I said, forcing a bright smile. And in the spirit of forgiveness, I've decided to offer my brother Jordan a position here at Margaret's. Gregory's face lit up with triumph. Jordan straightened, a smug smile returning to his lips. Jordan will be joining our team as our new bartender. The crowd broke into awkward applause, several people failing to suppress their laughter. Jordan's face contorted with humiliation, his cheeks flushing deep crimson. My father's knuckles whitened around his glass. I believe it's a position he's quite familiar with, I added, though I'm sure working at Seattle's hottest new restaurant will be a step up from the country club. To family. I raised my glass in mock toast. The rest of the evening passed in a blur. My father and brother remained frozen in their spots, trapped by social convention, unable to leave without causing an even greater scene. They endured congratulations from guests who now viewed them with barely disguised contempt. I watched from across the room, savoring every excruciatingly uncomfortable minute. After the last guest departed, they cornered me by the coat check. Jordan's eyes were red, either from alcohol or suppressed tears. You fucking planned this, my father hissed, his facade of paternal pride completely evaporated. You set us up to humiliate us. I straightened my chef's jacket. I simply told the truth, something this family has never been good at. You'll regret this, he growled. You think you're so successful now, but you have no idea. No, father, I interrupted calmly. You're the one who will regret. Every time someone in your social circle mentions your successful chef son, you'll remember this night. Every time someone asks why you never visit my restaurant, you'll remember this night. Jordan lunged forward. You arrogant piece of... Careful, I warned. Assaulting the executive chef won't look good on your bartending application. They stood speechless, defeated. I turned my back on them and walked toward my kitchen, my true home. Get out, I said without looking back. You know where the door is? I watched them stand there, shock and rage battling for dominance on their faces. For a moment, it seemed they might actually leave without further confrontation. Then Jordan lunged toward me, only to be held back by my father's restraining grip. You think you're so clever, Jordan spat, voice breaking. You could have just refused us privately. Why did you have to humiliate me in front of everyone? I leaned against the doorframe, arms crossed. Why? You mean the way you two showed up uninvited to my opening night? The way you pretended to have supported me all along? The way you lied to everyone about our loving family? We're still family, Jordan insisted, tears now streaming freely down his cheeks. You didn't have to do this. Family? I repeated, tasting the bitterness of the word. Was I family when Dad refused to pay for my education? Was I family when I was sleeping on Aunt Eleanor's couch? Was I family during the 10 years neither of you bothered to call, write, or check if I was even alive? My father stepped forward, attempting to regain control of the situation. His face was flushed with anger, but his voice took on that practiced, authoritative tone I remembered from childhood. Your mother would be ashamed of you tonight, Caleb. This petty revenge isn't what she taught you. Something snapped inside me. I stepped closer, my voice dangerously quiet. Don't you dare bring her into this. If Mom were alive, who do you think she'd be ashamed of? The son who followed his passion despite being abandoned? Or the father who deliberately sabotaged his own child's dreams to protect another's ego? I watched his face carefully as the words landed. For the first time in my life, I saw my father flinch. You never even tried to understand me, I continued. All those years, I wasn't grieving just Mom's death. I was grieving the fact that my own father couldn't love me for who I was. Gregory's jaw clenched, but he had no rebuttal. The truth had finally rendered him speechless. Jordan made one last desperate attempt. Caleb, please, I'm your brother. Do you really want to end things like this forever? I studied him for a long moment. The boy who had everything handed to him, the golden child, my supposed brother who had stood by and watched as I was cast out. End things? I laughed softly. Jordan, there's nothing to end. You two ended our relationship the day you chose your comfort over my existence. I'm simply acknowledging what's been true for years. But we can start over, he pleaded. I need this chance. Dad's business isn't doing well anymore. I have nowhere else to go. And there it was, the real reason for their sudden appearance in my life. Not love or reconciliation, just desperation. That's your problem now, I said quietly, not mine. My father's face hardened into a mask of cold fury. The mask had slipped earlier, but now it was firmly back in place. The expression I'd seen countless times growing up. You've made a grave mistake tonight, he warned. You think you're untouchable now, but success can be fleeting. When you fall, don't come crawling back to us. I smiled then, genuinely amused. That's rich coming from the man who just tried to crawl back to me. He grabbed Jordan's arm. We're leaving. Let your brother enjoy his little moment of triumph. As they turned to go, I called after them. The portrait stays. Mom deserves to be here. She's the only real family I ever had. They didn't look back as they walked away, two dark silhouettes against the city lights. I watched until they disappeared around the corner, feeling a strange lightness settling over me. For years, I'd carried the weight of their rejection, letting it fuel my ambition. Now, standing in front of my own restaurant, I realized I didn't need that weight anymore. I could succeed without it. I could live without it. When I finally turned to go back inside, I noticed Antoine watching me from the doorway. You okay, chef? He asked. I nodded, surprised to find it was true. Actually, yes, I think for the first time, I really am. In the weeks that followed, I heard through mutual acquaintances that Jordan had been busy spinning his own version of events. According to him, I had manipulated my aunt for money, lured my family to the opening just to humiliate them, and was running a restaurant on borrowed fame. Classic Jordan, unable to accept defeat with dignity. Caleb, did you hear what Jordan's been saying about you? My old high school friend Michael called to warn me. He's telling everyone you coerced your aunt into paying for culinary school and that you're only successful because of your mother's recipes. I just laughed. And who's believing him? No one who matters, Michael replied. Everyone remembers how your dad treated you. Even Aunt Eleanor got involved, calling several family friends to set the record straight. I offered to help Caleb because I believed in him, she told them. Gregory turned his back on his own son out of pure spite. The final desperate move came when Jordan left a voicemail threatening legal action over the restaurant name. You had no right to use Mom's name for your business, his voice slurred slightly. I'm consulting with lawyers about my rights as her son. I played the message for my attorney over lunch at Margaret's. She nearly choked on her wine laughing. He has absolutely no case, she assured me. Your mother's name isn't trademarked, and you have just as much right to honor her memory as he does. It's an empty threat from someone grasping at straws. I called Jordan back that evening, my only response. Try it. My lawyers are better than yours. He never mentioned it again. With that pathetic attempt at revenge fizzling out, I was finally free to focus entirely on what mattered. Margaret's earned its first Michelin star 18 months after opening. I expanded to a second location the following year. My cookbook hit the bestseller list, and through it all, I built a family of my own choosing, staff who became friends, customers who became regulars, colleagues who became confidants. Every night before closing, I'd look at my mother's portrait hanging in the main dining room. Sometimes I'd imagine her there, sitting at the best table, smiling as she watched me living the life she'd always wanted for me. Not the life my father had tried to force upon me, but the one that made me truly happy. 3 years after that fateful opening night, I was expediting orders during a busy dinner service when my host approached with a strange expression. Chef, there's a call for you at the front desk. He says it's urgent. It's your father. I felt a familiar tightness in my chest. What could he possibly want now? Another attempt to worm his way into my success? Or perhaps something had happened to Jordan. I glanced at my phone as the call was transferred. The screen displayed an unfamiliar number, but somehow I knew it was him. For a moment, I considered answering. Curiosity, maybe, or some lingering desire for resolution. But as I looked around at my bustling kitchen, my team working in perfect harmony, creating beautiful food in a space built with my own hard work, I realized there was nothing left to say. No closure needed, no forgiveness to give or receive. I pressed decline and slid the phone back into my pocket. Everything okay, chef? My sous chef asked. I smiled, genuinely. Never better. Let's get back to work. And just like that, I was free.